Today we're going to discuss in this lecture about the importance of training systems and the bigger process called development. Okay, so the difference between training and development is that development is the bigger umbrella in comparison to training because training is one component under development. Okay, you can allow people to undergo training, but throughout their career, they are developing and becoming a better employee. Okay, and a person may continue to develop even outside training. Okay, and in this topic, we're going to learn about what are the things to remember when you design and when you evaluate an effective training system. Like what I told you in other lectures, there's no such thing as a perfect employee nor applicant, but training can always compensate for the skills that this person is lacking. And training can be given as early as during the first day of an employee's stay in the company. That's why we have what we call a new employee orientation. Or an orientation may be called a socialization or job induction, which is the more formal term in other companies. Okay, now, so employee performance can be improved in many ways. And one way to have high employee performance is to select employees with necessary knowledge and skills. Okay, so just like what I talk about in selection, if you want your company to perform well, then you can select people who possess the right skills and competencies. But the other way to improve performance is to improve employee performance by training them. Okay, training the employees to have the ability to perform the job, but they may not have the knowledge, skills, and motivation to perform it. So the reason why you're training them is for you to convince them that they have the necessary resources to perform the different competencies that is expected out of them. Okay, now you are just bringing out that potentiality so that what they learn in training can be observed in their job performance. So we define training in this lecture as the systematic acquisition of skills, rules, concepts, or attitudes that result in an improved performance. Okay, so what makes training different from other sources of improvement is it's characterized by it is systematic. Okay, so like what I told you in the first slide, training and development typically go hand in hand, but sometimes you develop even without systematic acquisition of skills. Say for example, students may be curious in learning topics that are not even included in the syllabus, or they may be curious about skills that doesn't have anything to do with, say for example, psychology, like a psychology student who is learning how to use um, Photoshop or anything else that is not part of his course requirements. So he's learning something, although not in a systematic way. Okay, so a person may undergo self-directed training or self-directed search for knowledge, but a training what makes a training is that it is a systematic way to enhance skills of your employees. Okay, and training may be conducted at the same time. Training may also be conducted asynchronously, and that's what we're going to talk about later on. Training is essential for an organization because it ensures that employees have the knowledge and skills necessary to perform the job. Okay, so training compensates for the inability to select desired applicants because there are instances wherein a person may have all the competencies, skills, experience that we're looking for in an applicant. However, for some reason we did not hire this particular applicant, perhaps because of attitude problems, perhaps because of personality concerns, or perhaps we saw something while investigating the history of this person. So what we did was that we hired someone else, but the competencies of the person that we hired is not as good compared to the competencies of the person that we rejected. But don't worry, because even though this person doesn't possess the competencies possessed by the other person who is better, we can still work on that by allowing this person to undergo training. Okay, and we can identify these through different processes. Say, for example, with job analysis, it allows you to understand the nature and purpose of the job. That's why you have understood that a psychologist is someone who needs to be good in assessment, research, and intervention. So as a manager or as an executive, you can hire a psychologist, but even though he or she is not yet that experienced in practice, you can subject him to training under assessment, therapy, or research. Okay, so he or she may not be the best applicant, but you can still work on the skills that this applicant possess. Okay, and that's the good thing about training. Okay, you can compensate for what you were not able to do, or you can guide your employees to become better in what they are doing. Okay, other than that, you can get information from performance appraisal. Those who did not do well in certain areas may allow you to understand that, so my company need more training when it comes to online classroom utilization, or my company needs more training when it comes to customer service, or they need to adapt to a new software. Okay, so performance appraisal may help you identify who among your employees is actually in need of training, who among them can be a trainer. So that's another possibility. Why don't you get someone from inside the company to share about his or her knowledge? Of course, everything that I mentioned will happen if you're the type of executive who understand the nature of your company and you know the competencies of the people who work for you. But before you conduct any type of training, okay, first you need to conduct what we call a needs assessment or needs analysis. Okay, because most of the time, say for example, teachers or supervisors, mentors, they like to give you a lot of opportunities, but these students or mentees may not be so excited about the opportunities that you're providing to them. Okay, they may not realize the importance of learning research in the industry or learning about the role of gratitude in, and well-being in becoming a better employee. Okay, so you need to be able to somehow match what you're going to provide with what is needed by your company. And you identify what is needed by your company by conducting a needs analysis. So that can be in a form of a survey, form of a communication. Say, for example, a certain department will write a letter to the top management that they think that the online classroom is not being utilized that much by the entire university. So the top management will identify that the entire university needs to be trained in how to use the online classroom. So there are a lot of ways to understand the needs of your subordinates, okay? And there are various ways for you to align these needs with the resources of your company. With these resources, what kind of training can we give to our subordinates? Will this be lecture? Will this be a team building, etc.? So in this lecture, we define needs analysis as the first step in developing a training system, and its purpose is to determine the types of training that are needed in our organization. It shows the extent to which training is a practical means of achieving an organization's goals. Okay, so it allows you to identify the goals of training. Or at times, it allows you to realize that is there really a need for training? Or perhaps we're doing something. It is part of our it is part of our company culture to train employees semi-annually. Okay, but needs analysis show you that perhaps this is not the time for training. Perhaps this is the time to improve employee satisfaction first. Perhaps this is the time to focus on employee compensation because their compensation is delayed. So needs analysis will also help you identify the right timing of administering a training program. Okay? So here are the various areas of concerns when doing needs analysis. Okay, and in order, these are organizational analysis, task analysis, and person analysis. And let's go and discuss them one by one in the following slides. So among the three that I mentioned to you, the first thing that you need to do is organizational analysis. So progress will be from the broadest among the three to the most specific, which is the person. So with organizational analysis, you do not analyze the employees yet, but rather you look at organizational factors that will either facilitate or inhibit training effectiveness. So here are some things that you might want to consider when you want to do training in your company or in your organization. So number one is, do you have the money to conduct the training program? So this question will open a lot of questions, okay, about the status of the company. So if you do not have enough resources, then perhaps you can get someone from inside a company for a lower professional fee, but still the quality is not compromised. So most of the time you're looking for a speaker who will come from outside, but you did not realize that there is a good skilled trainer that is in your own company. Okay, so sometimes we do not identify these things. That's why resources are somehow wasted or um, not directed to the right things. Okay, so you also need to consider things like venue, things like availability, etc. So if you decided that you're going to conduct a certain training, where are you going to do it? Are you going to do it in the company, or are you going to rent a space somewhere else, or are you going to train in a different place, or what we call team building? Of course, that would be more expensive than doing training in your own company. Okay, so these are the different considerations. But according to IO research, they said it was once found that doing a team building or training somewhere else may be perceived as something good by your employees because the destination or the venue where you're going to conduct training can be rewarding for your employees. So perhaps you can, connect their needs to travel, their need to explore with your company's need for a training, and or address both of them by doing a team building. Number two, goals the organization wants to achieve. So right now, what is it that you want to achieve? Would you like to focus on well-being? Would you like to focus on tenure? Would you like to focus on job satisfaction? Or would you like to focus on customer service? Or do you want to focus on um, building a greater relationship between your members? So there are different goals that you can consider. So what is it that you think is most important at the present? Okay, that's why most of the companies nowadays are focused on teaching how to use online classrooms, particularly among schools, because this is the most necessary in around the world or around the country. Okay, it's necessary for you to learn this skill. And number two, the ability to conduct training. Okay, so now that you have a venue, now that you're willing to undergo training and there is a need for training, the next question that you have to address is, do we have the resources, okay, to conduct this training? And when I talk about resources, these are finances, physical space, and time. Okay, so do you have the time to do this? Do you have the venue to do this? I think right now more people are adapting online ways of teaching. That's why it's easier to conduct training nowadays, because space and time may not be as problematic as before. Okay, and lastly, the extent to which employees are willing and able to be trained. Maybe a pandemic or a problem like a pandemic may be barriers from being interested in joining a training program. What if they are more interested in doing quote and unquote more important things? What if they don't have the resources to engage in such training? What if they're not interested? So you need to address things like the ability of your employees to join the training. Do they have to pay for their own transportation to go to the venue, or will the company provide their own transportation? Because those may be little things, but those are serious concerns for someone who works. Okay, things like commuting, things like additional expenses may not be the number one priority. for an employee, specifically if their priority would be the needs of their family. Okay, so these things may hinder, okay, may be a hindrance when it comes to fostering interest in joining training. Other than that, commitment. So if they join the training, how are you going to make sure that they stay in the training program? What gives you the assurance that they're not going to drop out in the first day or in the second day? Okay, so there need to be something that will reward their commitment. Okay, and those are the things that we're going to talk about later on. After considering those organizational factors that I discussed a while ago, now it's time to consider specific factors, which is called task analysis. Okay, so now in task analysis, we use different sources of information, such as the results of job analysis. Okay, to identify the tasks performed by each employee and the condition wherein these tasks are performed. And other than that, we allow ourselves to understand and identify the different competencies needed to perform the task. Okay, so now that we have already decided that we are in need of a training, the next thing to do is to be more specific in your approach. Okay, so now that online teaching is really necessary, there are various ways to achieve that goal. So what would be the priority for your organization, for your university? So most universities right now may be focused in teaching their teachers and professors on how to handle online classroom. But handling an online classroom is not the only way to achieve online a fully online means of teaching. But because that is the most needed, identified using task analysis, then that would be the one that needs to be addressed in training. So other than that, you also identify what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to be possessed by someone who is going to undergo training, and what would be the changes in the KSAs that needs to be possessed after the training. Okay, so this allows you to establish a baseline. So in order for you to participate in this training, is it necessary that you have a background in using an online classroom? Is it necessary that you know how to use Microsoft Office or your email? Okay. And then after that training, what are the new competencies that we can observe among our workers? Okay. So you can do this through different means, such as interview. You can interview the right person who knows what he or she is talking about. Say, for example, if this is about online teaching, then ask someone who has engaged in online teaching, or ask someone who has a background in IT. Okay. Number two, observation. So with your observation amongst your employees, among the demands of your subordinates, then how can we address that, okay, in training? Okay, how can we help them? How can we address the different problems that are existing? Okay, and then task inventories. We can also look at the things that are expected from a certain employee, and then we're going to look at those competencies. Can employee A perform all the tasks that is expected out of him? Okay, because if all employees fail at a certain task, and in our case, some of the professors were not able to handle an online classroom before the pandemic, therefore the organization has identified that everybody needs to be trained in how to handle an online classroom. Okay, that's the way of the company to help us fulfill our tasks, which is the ability to handle, or which is the capability to handle an online classroom. Okay, so once the tasks and competencies for a job have been identified, the next step is to determine how employees learn to perform each task or obtain each competency. Okay, so you need to be specific in setting goals in your training. Say, for example, the task that needed to be learned is to how to answer questions about rates of your services. Okay, and then to answer that, okay, or to be able to do that, you need to train your employee to understand the daily rate charts. Okay. Or say, for example, the task is to process customer transaction. Then how can you achieve that? That can be achieved by training your employee or training your teller how to perform the basic teller skills, okay, by undergoing basic teller training, okay, how to calm irate customers, how to check loan applications for accuracy. So here are the different tasks or things to do, and you need to match that with the different training, okay, that will be provided. Okay, and sometimes there are companies wherein they organize their training approach wherein they do beginner, advanced, intermediate methods. Okay, wherein they identify who is going to undergo beginner training, advanced training, and intermediate training. Okay, depending on the demand in the organization. And then finally, after doing task analysis, what you can do now is analyze the persons who will be involved in training, or analyze the employees. And why do we need to do this? Because not every employee needs further training for every task performed. So we do not want our employees to be trained for something that they already know unless it is necessary. Okay, so say for example, you will train professionals the basics about Microsoft Word. What if they're Generation Y and Generation C employees? Then perhaps there's no need to teach them how to turn on a computer, how to turn on Microsoft Word. That's no longer needed. That's very redundant. So that's one example of doing a training that does not match the needs analysis. Number two, person analysis should also include an evaluation of an employee's readiness for training. So it will allow you to understand if the person possess the skill to undergo training. Say, for example, you're investigating who among these people will qualify for the advanced level of training. So the person analysis allowed you to separate those who will benefit from beginner and those who will benefit from advanced training. Okay, and the sources of information in person analysis are the following: performance appraisal scores, surveys with the different people involved, interviewing them, and even the critical incidents that I mentioned to you in the previous lecture. Okay, because there are instances wherein we want to train people, but they are not in need of training. And what if training is as long as 5 days? Then it also means that they need to, allot time and effort in attending training. But what if they have to do something else? Okay, so that's additional stress to your employees, and you need to be sensitive about these things as a responsible employer. Okay, so the needs analysis will help you identify the goals that you're going to pursue in conducting training. Now, the next thing that you need to address is to choose the best training method, because there are various ways and delivering a material. Okay, and then those are the things that we're going to discuss in this part of the lecture. So most training programs have multiple goals and objectives, and the best training programs often use a variety of methods so that employees will understand the reasons for doing a certain task, how it should be done, and in what situation it should be done. Okay, and then perhaps you were able to undergo these different methods. Okay, and then we're just going to refresh them and integrate them to each other at the end of the lecture. So let's take a look at these different training techniques or methods. The first method is like what we are doing right now. We're doing a lecture. So lectures are a good training source if the goal is for employees to obtain knowledge. But unless they're accompanied by such techniques such as simulation, role plays, they are not usually effective at teaching skills. So a lecture will help the learner embrace the conceptual and foundational knowledge regarding a topic. Say, for example, contemporary techniques and interventions in therapy. However, a learner may not be able to possess the necessary skills to demonstrate these things. Okay, that's why you need to combine different training approaches such as simulations and role plays with lectures. Okay, and then other than that, one more thing that will help you improve your lecture is to make sure that the learners will have a copy of your presentation or have a summary of what you presented. In other words, a good lecture is um, is accompanied by a comprehensive handout. Okay, because let us not expect that the learner will remember everything that we have discussed. That's why we should help the learner in retaining what was discussed during the training through handouts and through simulations and role plays. The next is what we call case studies. This can be done individually or by group. So I hope you remember what I told you in selection, wherein there's an approach that wherein you have to get a paper from a fishbowl, and then you will read it, and then you will try to give a solution to that problem. So basically, that is like a case study. So a case study allows you, or it allows you to develop your problem solving skills. Okay, so in order for a case study to be successful, the cases should be taken from actual situations. That's why most professors in abnormal psychology will anchor their explanations from their actual clients. Okay, the drawback in the case study is that the trainees may not be the best individuals to solve a problem, because there is what we call living case. When we say living case, it's not merely a case study but a real problem in the company. So basically, you're trying to address, or you're trying to hit two birds with one stone. You want to address the problem in your company by converting it into a hypothetical problem, and then you allowed your employees to read them during training and ask suggestions from them on how to solve it. However, here's the thing: if that problem is a real problem, then it may not be helpful to your learners. If you cannot solve it, then how can you expect your learners to solve the problem? Okay, but let's look at the positive side here. So according to IO research, the positive side of giving a living case is that if one of your trainees were able to solve the problem, then perhaps that's the solution to the actual problem that that your company is going through right now. Okay, and finally, a case study should be interesting and realistic as possible, so that your learners will do their best in trying to understand and process this case study. Next is that we can also do a simulation. Okay, so when we do a simulation, remember what I told you in the selection process. So a simulation is designed to place an applicant in a situation similar to that one that will be encountered on the job. Okay, so in simulation, you work with the equipment under the working conditions that you will face while on the job itself. Okay, so what makes it different compared to role play is that in role play, the focus is on the communication skills, doing the right thing at the right situation. In simulation, the focus is not really on the communication skills of the person, but rather it's on the competency of the person in using the machine. So or the machine or the apparatus. Say, for example, a simulation may involve how to run basic statistical tests in Excel. So that's a simulation. Okay, the focus is not on communicating what he or she learned, but on how to you perform the technicalities. A role play, on the other hand, is a technique wherein you ask your trainees to act out simulated roles. Okay, so it allows the person to develop his or her interpersonal skills, but they are not for everyone, especially if you have some shy or introverted trainees. They may not engage in role plays. Okay, so other than that, role play exercises has an employee acting or playing the role of the other person, and this is beneficial because your employees may not actually understand the problem from the perspective of the manager or from the perspective of the customer. So role play will allow them to have a greater understanding of the bigger picture. Also, we have what we call behavior modeling, which is basically similar to role play. The difference is that in role play, you just act out behaviors, but in behavior modeling, the ideal behavior is being performed. Hence, in behavior modeling, it differs compared to role play because behavior modeling allows you to perform, or your trainers correct your behavior so that what you're going to show is the correct or the right behavior. Okay, so this allows you to identify what are the correct things to do and what are the incorrect practices so that you will no longer do this in the actual work situation. Okay, so to motivate your employees to attend training, then the following must be addressed. Okay, so first, relate the training to an employee's immediate job. So, say for example, before the pandemic, a lot of universities, I know this, are trying to adapt online learning. However, not all their applicants or employees are interested in learning how to handle an online classroom because they don't see any connection between the job and the training. But right now, everyone is embracing online learning because it is necessary. Okay, so also make training interesting. Okay, that is self-explanatory. Okay, don't bore them with training or lecture, and then increase employee buy-in, or in layman's term, allow them, give them a choice. Okay, I know that as a manager, you have an idea of what the right training should be, but just like what we learn in different theories of personality, allow them to choose or allow them to have a choice, like among these various topics, which of them do you like to be addressed first, or all of these are interesting, but which of them would be our priority? Okay, so that you can make them choose between mental health, between labor law, etc. Okay, and of course, you can provide incentives. Okay, sometimes employees are proud by merely receiving the certificate of completion and they post it in social media, and that boosts their self-esteem. Okay, and uh, and in other situations, undergoing training may have bigger incentives, such as getting promoted. See, for example, you have went to a training abroad for 20 days, then when you came back, you have a certificate of completion, and that allows you to handle a higher position in the company. And of course, okay, you know this, we should provide food because these are little expenses, but allow helping your employees with their little expenses build on the trust and commitment of those employees to your company. And finally, reduce stress associated with attending. So if you expect that your employees are going to attend training for 5 days, okay, relieve them of their other duties or things to do. So do not expect that they will focus on training and their job at the same time. Okay, because most of the time, if you're in training, you cannot do your job. Okay, that's why you need to reduce your expectancies when it comes to productivity, because which is more important at that time is to understand what is being taught in training and not really the productivity. So the timing of training is important as well. That's why teachers train during the summer break. Okay, so earlier I already shared to you about the different possible training methods that you can use, such as the behavior modeling, the role playing, etc. Now, this time, let's look at the bigger picture, because a training program can be applied not only in the classroom, it can only be applied through distance learning or on the job itself, which the meaning of on the job training here is that even though you're not technically in a training program, you're still being trained by doing your job every day, just like probationary employees or like what you do in practicum in college. Okay, so that's what on-the-job training means. Now let's take a look at these classifications. Okay, so that you will know how can we deliver training programs in alternative ways. Okay, just like what I told you earlier, you can deliver a lecture, you can deliver a role playing or simulation exercise in a classroom. But if you do a classroom training, here are some initial decisions that you have to make. Number one is who will conduct the training. So just like when choosing a certain professor for a subject, the executive will select a trainer for a certain training program. So who's going to deliver the training program? Are you going to get someone from inside the company, or are you going to get someone from outside the company? And I think I told you earlier the pros and cons of that approach. Okay, most of the time you can save a lot of resources by getting someone from inside. Okay, but when you get someone from outside, you don't know that perhaps that person can be more competent, but you must be ready to spend real amount of cash. Okay, And where will the training be held? Will it be in the office, in the field, or will it be in a different location, which is called a team building? And how long should it be? Okay, you don't want to tire your employees. Okay, you don't want them to be tired. You don't want them to run out of energy just because of training, because instead of being rewarding, the training experience somehow becomes a punishment if it's stretched out for too long. So say for example, we can avoid training for 5 straight days, or we can avoid training that will, take the entire day. We can just have a half day training and then ask them to come back once a week. So what I'm talking about now is the two kinds of training called mass practice or distributed practice. So with mass practice, it's like trying to understand the entire book the day or the week before the exam. That's what mass practice is. But when we say distributed practice, you do not try to understand everything in one shot, but rather you spread it into different smaller sessions and then you connect the dots to each other. According to IO research, distributed practice is more effective than mass practice. So as students, I would hope that you're not applying mass practice, but rather try to practice distributed training. Okay, in other words, in the corporate setting, instead of giving 5 or 3 whole days of training, then why don't you give a month-long training that it's not given every day, but rather it can be twice or thrice weekly, and the time spent in the training room is not so long. Say, for example, a half day or 3 hours, and that is more beneficial than a mass practice wherein they get overwhelmed with the information. Okay, and then after classroom training, we can also administer training through distance learning. And I guess because of the current situation, because of what we're doing in this online classroom, you can relate to distance learning. So based on my own experience, I would say that Filipino companies are not so open to this idea before the pandemic. Okay, so most of the time, Filipino companies would require you to be there. They would require you to be physically present, or they would require you to be there in the office. That happens a lot of most of the time. Okay, not all companies have embraced distance learning, but because of the current situation, everybody have to adapt quickly, and then most schools and companies are adapting online methods of communicating to each other. Okay, and then what we're going to take a look at here are two categories which are called asynchronous and synchronous. So think about it. If you're doing online learning right now in your university, what is it that is being implemented in your school? Is it asynchronous or synchronous? Because the difference between the two is that if we do asynchronous training, it means that it doesn't require all the learners to be present at the same time, just like watching this video online, but it is not required that all students will watch the video at the same time. Okay, so that's not a requirement in asynchronous training or learning. In asynchronous, you have your own phase because we are considering a lot of factors, okay, such as internet, such as availability, etc. On the other hand, when we do synchronous training, it's like attending an online seminar or webinar all at the same time, wherein you cannot attend on an earlier or time in an earlier time or a later date, but rather you need to be present during the time of the webinar. Okay, so there are pros and cons between these approaches. Okay. So here are the types of asynchronous and synchronous trainings that are typically used in the industry. Okay, so for asynchronous, particularly in the Western setting, they have what we call interactive videos, wherein these can be tutorials, these can be problem solving, and then from the different choices presented in the video, you get to select the what's your choice, and then the video will give you a feedback if what you did is correct or is it incorrect, etc. Okay, but we know that this is not the only way to deliver an asynchronous training. Just like here in the Philippines, what we do is mostly video lectures, and then if the student or the person who will attend the training will not be available during the time of the training, then a link will be given to them. Okay, just like doing meetings. Okay, if you cannot attend the meeting at the time that you're required to attend the meeting, then we can just give you minutes of the meeting or a summary of what has been talked about. On the other hand, when we say synchronous, okay, these can be webinars, webcasts, wiki, and listserv. The difference between a webinar and a webcast is that according to IO resources, webinars are interactive while webcasts are just like watching a video, but you do not necessarily interact with the speaker or with the material. So because of the current situation, we have done a lot of webinars and webcasts, and I know that a webinar is interactive because in one webinar that I attended, the speaker will usually ask one of the audience in the online classroom to unmute his microphone and show his or her face and then speak and share about what he or she has been learned so far. So that's an interactive approach in delivering a training program. Other than that, we can also use the internet or wiki. I think this is self-explanatory. Just like exploring articles on your own or exploring pages, web pages, or designing. If the company have their own website, perhaps they can upload their own training materials there so that their employees can access that. That's a wiki. And a listserv is a software that sends training news or updates to the employees. Like I remember when I was in school, we have this software that automatically emails everybody when there's an announcement. Say for example, the guidance office has an upcoming activity about stress management. So if they have an activity like that, they will just contact the IT personnel, and then the IT personnel will send an email to everyone containing the email from the guidance office. Okay, so this is also utilized in the corporate setting. And then lastly, we can also train employees by doing on-the-job training. So it's not technically training like what I told you earlier, but rather it's an informal training wherein you get informally trained by being exposed to your supervisor. You get informally trained by doing your own job. Okay, that's why we have what we call a probationary period. Okay, so that's your first 6 months of trying to learn what you do. Of course, you won't learn everything in training, but rather there are a lot of things that you learned while doing the job itself, like simple life hacks, simple skills when you deal with customers, because not all situations can be anticipated when doing training. That's why, in this case, perhaps on the job training is like learning from by gaining experience. Okay, so it works best for teaching skills that require supervision to learn and are best learned through repetition and benefit from role modeling. Okay, just like learning how to conduct therapy, learning how to conduct assessment. Of course, you cannot do those things within the absence of a supervisor. That's why a supervisor is required in the Code of Ethics for you to do therapy and assessment, especially if you're not a licensed psychologist yet. And we cannot teach assessment and therapy by merely doing training. You really have to be exposed to clients. What's important is that while you're learning, your supervisor can immediately give feedback to you if you're doing well or not. Okay, I want to clear something about on-the-job training, especially to my Filipino listeners here, because in our country, in the Philippines, when we say OJT, what comes into your mind is you have to be enrolled in school and working at the same time. Well, that may not be the case in other countries in the way that they define OJT, because in OJT you don't have necessarily it's not necessary for you to be enrolled in school. Simply learning by doing the job is called OJT. Okay, so maybe the term that is close to OJT in the Filipino setting is the word apprenticeship. Okay, and I guess there are a lot of opportunities that you have undergone apprenticeship even though you are not enrolled in school. Say for example, being a volunteer psychologist in a certain clinic wherein you're not enrolled in a school but you're learning because you decided to be a volunteer psychologist. So now let's talk about the different ways to train an employee while he or she is on the job. Okay, so the first thing that I would like to share to you is job rotation, or what we call cross training. When we say cross training, that is a system in which employees are given the opportunity to perform several different jobs in an organization. Okay, so that is useful for training managerial employees, and it is also useful in a way that it allows for both lateral transfers within an organization and allowing for greater flexibility and replacing absent workers. So job rotation is a technique or method in training wherein you allow people to perform the job of another individual. Say for example, when I was in college, I remember that employees in our university have to be shuffled to different departments so that these tenured employees can gain more skills by going out of their comfort zones. Like, for example, someone from the research department was transferred to the university registrar, someone from the finance department was transferred to the, let's say, for example, the engineering office, etc., so that they can be exposed to various fields or they can be exposed to various jobs. Okay, and then according to theories of motivation, this helps address the person's boredom because in real life, when you've been doing the same thing over and over again, you will get bored. Okay? And if you've been doing the same job, say for example, for 1 year, then you can see nothing new about it anymore. That's why to address employee boredom, then you can do job rotation. Let him appreciate the other aspects of being a worker that he wasn't able to encounter before. Okay? So the advantage of doing job rotation is that this is an effective way to train those who are candidates for a managerial position. Why? Because you cannot be a manager if you don't know the functions of different people who is going to work for you. That's why an effective way to train someone who will be a manager in the future is allow him to experience the different functions of the different positions in the same unit so that when he becomes a manager, he will have a more realistic expectations. Okay, he will understand how an employee feel. He will understand what it means to be overworked in a certain area. Okay, and a lot of related stuff to that one. And other than that, it allows for lateral transfer. It means that because of your flexibility as an employee, if someone resigns or someone gets moved to another department, then it's easy to find a replacement because you know the function of that vacant position. Okay, and then after that one, it is also beneficial in replacing absent workers. So in case someone was absent for a day, then the customer doesn't have to hear the words I don't know. Um, I don't. I have no idea about his job. Okay, that's frequently heard in a company, especially if you're not so familiar with the jobs of each other. It's like the process stops if someone is absent. But if you are flexible or you know the function of that other person, then you can replace him in case he or she is absent. Another way to deliver an on-the-job training is through apprenticeship. And in the Western setting, when we say apprenticeship, most of the time it is used in crafts and building trades professions. Okay, so say for example, apprenticeship may be the word that will be used in for example in factories, in handicrafts, etc. Wherein crafts and building trades is the nature of the company. And when we say apprenticeship, this is a combination of formal coursework and on-the-job training. Okay, that's another way to look at it. So when you do apprenticeship, other than learning from your supervisor through lecture, he also exposed you to on-the-job training. So I can say that my practicum in psychology is somehow an apprenticeship because my my mentor in OJT, she gives lecture about psychological assessment, and then she allows us to assess certain individuals from the from the clinic. And then after that one, she will also give a lecture on how to write a psychological report. So our training is not just about work, it's not just about lecture, but a combination of both. Okay, and that is called an apprenticeship. And the last way to do on-the-job training is by conducting coaching and mentoring. So the difference between coaching and mentoring is that when we say coaching, that's temporary. A person or a superior will teach you how to do or perform a certain skill. Say for example, on your first week on the job, your manager taught you how to use the software that has been used in the company for quite some time. Odd, in contrast to coaching, mentoring is more long term, and mentoring go beyond training. Okay, so if someone is your mentor, he or she doesn't guide you only during training programs, but rather he guides you through your career. So he helps you advance, he helps you get promoted, he helps you advance your status in the company. So that's what a good mentor does. Okay, so the difference of coaching and mentoring is that mentoring is more long term. The problem with this setup is that not all good workers are good trainers and vice versa. Okay, so I think number one is self-explanatory. And with number two, it diminishes the expert's productivity. Say, for example, I'm the expert and you're the mentee, and I'm going to teach you for 1 week, then how am I supposed to do my job? Okay, so I was able to teach you, but I sacrifice or compromise my own productivity. So what is advised by Amot is to allow these experts, okay, to experience what we call pass-through programs. So pass-through programs are programs wherein experienced workers are temporarily assigned to training department. So it means that if you're going to be a mentor, then you need to spend some time in the training department so that you will know the basics of how to handle a training program or an apprenticeship. Okay, so maybe I would guess that senior teachers in schools have to be trained by the training department in how they're going to handle the young teachers that they are mentoring. Okay, when young teachers are doing practicum program in schools. Okay, so that's the importance of training the trainers, so that when if you train the trainers, they will be more effective in giving training to their subordinates or to their mentees. And now we have been talking about the various types of training and how to deliver them. The last thing that we're going to discuss is how do we say that training is effective. So here are the following evaluation criteria that you might want to consider, and let's discuss the advantages and disadvantages. The first thing that most employers use is employee reactions. So with employee reactions, they ask for the opinions of the employee, such as did you enjoy, or did you learn, or did you get something new? Did you have a good time, or was the trainer is he boring, or is the training not effective? So that's employee reactions. What are the first impressions of the learners about the training program? Although it's convenient to get reactions, research in IO would say that this one is not so it's not really a valid way of measuring learning. So there are other ways that you can see here on the screen. The second one is employee learning. When we say employee learning, you measure objectively how much the employee has learned. And how do you do this? You give them pre-test and post-test. Okay, so in order for a training program to be effective, then there must be an increase in score after the training. So that's employee learning. And the third one is application of training. Of course, after training, you don't want them to just do good in the test. You also want them to do good on the job. Okay, so an example of application of training is seeing or observing that all your employees were able to use Excel effectively after the advanced Excel workshop, or seeing that all your faculty members know how to handle an online classroom after the online classroom seminar. Okay, so that's an application of training. This means that you see that your employees were able to apply what they learned during training into their jobs. Application of training is also known as transfer of training. The fourth one is more technical. This is business impact. If we say that the training had business impact, it means that you were able to achieve your goals. So that's the keyword with business impact. You achieve your goals. So say for example, your goal after training is to have less than 2% less than 2% conflict or incidents involving staff and client. So if you were able to achieve that goal, then there's business impact. If you trained your maintenance providers or maintenance workers and your goal is to have less than 1% problems with the trains or with the um, other stuff that requires maintenance, then if you're able to achieve that goal, then there's business impact. Another example of business impact can be an increase in 10 in an increase of 10% in the number of clients who said that they were satisfied with service. So that's also one way of reaching a goal. Okay, those are business impacts. And the last one is return of investment. So I think most of you already know what return of investment means. So when we say ROI, you were able to gain more money compared to what you spent for training. Say, for example, you spent 100,000 pesos in training, then hopefully you gain something more than 100,000. Like you earned 200 or 300,000. So that's return of investment. So these are various ways for you to say that training has been helpful to your organization. So here's the summary of what we discussed. So the first step in the training process is to conduct a needs assessment, and it has three levels: organizational, task, and person analysis. And training methods take many forms. It can be in the classroom, it can be through distance learning, or it can be via OJT. And then psychological principles such as modeling, distributed practice, and transfer of training must be considered when conducting a training program. And finally, it's important to evaluate the success by measuring trainee attitudes, knowledge, ability to a newly learned material, and improve performance. So basically, that is it. Those are the things you need to learn about training. And I hope that after this lecture, you will give more importance and you will be more attentive whenever you attend a training program. Okay, and this is the importance of a training program in a company. I hope you learned a lot, and thank you.